there's nothing more valuable you can do than to go talk to customers. And in general, with advertising and marketing, I think that is a real lost art, is the art of research. And if you look back at, I spent a lot of time when I was like, there was a point in my life when I was like, I'm getting good at this, and I had a stack. I went back to the old masters and I studied the ancient scrolls of advertising and marketing theory and copywriting and all of that. And it was very clear to me, how scientific the advertising process was.
Emily, thank you so much for being here with us today. I am so excited to get to know you more and to learn from you and to have our community get to do the same. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you.
We've already established in our little pre-conversation that there's a lot to connect on. We are going to start off by talking about the role of human connection, specifically as you are building a business, and even more specifically as you are building a brand, and really kind of the case for connection and community from the brand side of things. But I think to get started off, help us understand, what is the difference between a business and a brand? Does every business have a brand? Is every brand a business? How do you define these two things?
Well, that's a good question. No, they're very different. I think they're totally different. One definition of it would be that a business is worth its revenue, whereas a brand is worth multiples of its revenue. In the way that, and the person who said that to me, I've talked to a lot of people about brand because I got really obsessed with brand a couple of years ago. And so I'm a lifelong performance marketer. I'm the most unlikely person in the world to suddenly become an evangelist for brand marketing. But I started to educate myself on sort of how do people are really good at building brands that are sort of 100-year brands or on that trajectory, because that's a big deal. The most heard of brands, the most recognized brand names in the country are almost all at least 50 years old, if not 70 years old. There's something to that, So, but the person who said that to me, the whole thing of a business is worth its revenue, a brand is worth multiples of its revenue, was Andrew Rosen, who you might know as the GOAT of the retail fashion industry. He started Theory. He is Rag & Bone. He's the guy. And, and I agree with that definition, but if you unpack it, why is that? Why is a brand worth more than its revenue, whereas a business is just worth its revenue? And I think that one of the reasons is because brands have built-in loyalty, and that when you look at an M&A transaction, you've told a company, there is something on that, M&A transaction deal sheet that says brand equity. And that's one of the biggest determinants of what that thing is going to sell for, right? Even though it's something that you can't quantify, you can't measure it, you know what I mean? But people believe it and they know the power of it. Why? Because I think it essentially guarantees future annuity of revenue, right? Because it represents loyalty, right? And so if I'm just a business, if I'm selling, floor tiles, right, and the business pops up right next to me, that's not, and there's no brand to my business, no customer promise that I've really banked this thing on. It's just about the product. There's no defensive motor on the company, right? And so nor is there any guarantee of future revenue. Whereas I think if you have a brand, what you have is a guarantee to your customers' future purchases, as long as you don't F it up. You know what I mean? Because I've become that brand, and so I was reading this article about Pepsi the other day, and just the extraordinary loss of market share that happened when they stopped doing brand advertising. And so you have to protect it. You know what I mean? You've got to keep. Yeah. But once you've gotten it there, people identify with your brand, and you've got their future purchases. So that's why I think brands are worth more. And the other thing, brands are not the same as products either. There's a very famous case study that I'm going to probably botch, but it was something along the lines of GE bought a portfolio of products from Black & Decker, but the only, there was a caveat on the sale, which is that you can't use the Black & Decker name, or it might have been vice versa. It doesn't. And what they found was they thought the products in themselves would happen, but didn't. They totally lost the category because what people trusted was the Black & Decker name, right? I wouldn't buy a beauty brand right now. If a beauty brand came up to you and said, Liz, we buy our product portfolio, but you can't use our brand name, you would say no, because the products are so commoditized, that market is so saturated. Where does the value in the company sit? It sits in the brand. And what is brand represents? It represents perception and what customers think of, right? And have you successfully marketed something in a way that their identity has absorbed you? That's the goal of a brand. There's trust built in. There's a customer promise. There's who you become when you wear the sweater or the jewelry or whatever it is. That's the brand marketing layer. That's where a lot of the value of the company sits. So, no, brands and businesses are very different. I think brands, when you successfully build a brand, you have something that's protectable, that has an inertia built into it, positive inertia of long-term value, because you've essentially bought your customer's future purchase.
I love that. Okay, I read that you said a brand carries emotional resonance, loyalty, perceived value, and qualities that create deeper long-term relationships with their customers. If you were coming in, which you and your company do this, my understanding is you do this as both a kind of coach and strategic advisor to founders and CEOs, but you've built an entire, one of the biggest mega advertising, specifically on the brand side, agencies, I don't know, in the world. Maybe I should have fact checked that before I said that, but you don't have to correct me. I'm just going to say it. We're just going to let it go. If it's my mistake, then just let it be my mistake. So let's imagine you are coming into a company and they're going, Emily, we don't know. Do we have a brand or do we have a business? What are like 3 questions that you would ask them to even help determine, do you have a brand or do we have a business on our hands and we got to build a brand from scratch?
That's such a good question. So, and I think most companies actually probably can't answer that question. So what is a brand? So there are 2, components to I think really having a brand. One is like saliency. It's what's called saliency. So what do people associate with you? So if I say, okay, I've got my Caddis glasses, right? This is actually very simple, because Tim, the founder of this company, was broke when he starting this. He wasn't broke. He was like an advertising guy in an agency. He's a really cool guy, but they couldn't afford like super expensive influencers and all that. But what they did was they walked around Venice Beach, and their goal was to find people who looked interesting. Have you ever seen an ad for Caddis glasses?
I don't think I have.
Check out the website. You'll see.
Okay.
The way I learned, I got hooked on it. I'm a big online shopper, so I got hooked on an Instagram ad, and because the woman looked interesting, and she was probably wearing these exact glasses, and she was actually a real person. She was a female professional surfer who was retired. But even just that remit of, we're going to go find influencers who look interesting. They weren't influencers, people who look interesting. And they're going to represent our brand. Because what are you saying when you represent your brand with people who look interesting? You're saying to the person, oh, if what excites you about your own identity is looking interesting, then you're in the right place, right? And so I think he had a really clear idea around his brand, even more than because glasses are pretty commoditized. But the brand was, these are the glasses for people who are creative and interesting. And so I think if you ask a lot of these companies, because I have asked them, what is the brand, why? And so why do you, what is the shared, this is you, Liz, this is right up your wheelhouse. What is the shared sort of fabric of meaning or identity that runs underneath you and your team and your customers? That shared fabric is the emotional rallying cry. It's the Magna Carta behind what you're doing, the emotional Magna Carta, right? It's the emotional rallying cry. That's your brand why. Now, there is also the matter of who you become.
Okay, before you move on, because I think this is so good, and I just want to amplify this. I think oftentimes, I loved the story you chose to tell. I don't know if you've heard the phrase kind of in design thinking, you've got like bird's eye thinking and then you've got worm's eye thinking. And it's like, we're all about like bird's eye view, but a worm's eye view is right, like getting as small and kind of granular and like up close to the customer as possible. And I think oftentimes in the business context, even when we talk about brand, I think our brains as CEOs, as founders, as brand builders is more to go to some like, let's hire a big consulting team to come in and do a meta like analysis of the landscape and then reverse engineer and I just love that story of like, or go to Venice Beach.
Right.
Like there's such a like worm's eye view approach to that is, I think we underestimate the value of go to an actual place with actual people and see who you're drawn to, and then have a conversation with that person. I know in the very early days of starting my company, I did this exact same thing. And it was honestly, if I could have afforded to spend a lot of money on a fancier way of market research, trust me, I would have. This was literally just because I was broke as a joke. And I remember going down to a university campus in my city and literally like a pathetic, like political canvasser, I like had my product and I had my clipboard and I was like literally, and I was like pitching the story to them in different ways and seeing, and then I would ask them how much they would pay for the product based off of how I told the story. Not in a even statistically significant way, but the amount of value that I got from spending 3 days in real life with real people, it took a lot of, it's not fun. It took a lot of guts, like to not hide behind some sort of marketing consultancy to go have the conversations for me. But that created my brand storytelling and going like, okay, this seems to resonate more. Let's go with that. Of course, over time, we had to revisit it and it did actually have to significantly evolve. But that carried us for like the first like several years. And so I love that story of going, maybe just entertain the idea. It's not as complicated as we're making. You just got to go like, especially as a founder and like executive, go be with the people. That's right. Hear it yourself and see what emerges and like treat that like the gold mine that it could potentially be, which it sounds like this entire brand was like, that's kind of how they did their thing.
I mean, if you had one thing to do, I just couldn't agree with you more. And I wish that I could reference this project I'm knee deep in right now because it is a brand repositioning thing. And when they went to, part of the process is go talk to customers and talk to non-customers being people in the demographic who are aware of you but chosen not to purchase. Why? Right? You've really got to understand that. But then you also want to understand the customer perspective. And of everything this process entails, if there's one thing I would say to do, it's that, and that also, by the way, is a lot where a lot of the hit ads come from. It's just some random thing. Somebody will say, I stopped wearing jeans when I turned 40. They're just not comfortable enough. My bar's gotten higher on comfort. And, and then that will turn into a hit ad. Or I have fine hair. I can't grow it out. I need a solution for fine hair. And that turns into a thing. There's nothing more valuable you can do than to go talk to customers. And in general, with advertising and marketing, I think that is a real lost art, is the art of research. And if you look back at, I spent a lot of time when I was like, there was a point in my life when I was like, I'm getting good at this, and I had a stack. I went back to the old masters and I studied the ancient scrolls of advertising and marketing theory and copywriting and all of that. And it was very clear to me, how scientific the advertising process was in the first half of the 20th century. And that's a real lost art. And it's ironic, because research, I mean, they would just do, like Nielsen was a huge company and like they would do what you did personally. They would hire people to go do, but they would just do this massive market research to establish product positioning. What are the key hooks? How are we going to advertise it? What's the advertising campaign going to be based on? Nobody takes that time anymore. And it's ironic because it is so much easier now to do that through the social platforms. Those things are like fruit fly testing to me. Those are the greatest customer insights engines in the world. Fruit fly testing, why do they test on fruit flies? Because they reproduce and die quickly and they're very cheap. So the learning cycles are fast and cheap. Yeah. That same is true for social testing. And certainly just going out. By the way, statistical significance, the first couple of years of building Chief Detective, we were very focused on statistical significance because our whole thing is the power of small scale tests. And if you really are committed to a testing-based approach, you're going to be a lot more successful. But so we obsessed over that. How do we measure a test? How is that a legit result? And I've just completely abandoned that because I do think you could talk to 3 people and you can have your answer. You know what I mean? Like,
wow.
So what you did is perfect.
Okay, that I hope feels really, hearing that from you, it's different, of just like, I hope that founders or executives or, folks on a marketing team hear that and feel really inspired and a sense of agency that like small data does matter. And what I hear you saying is maybe in some ways it's even better. It's more visceral and like juicy and colorful than definitely like this kind of large data set. I think that's for sure. So okay, so let's say if you don't know what your second point was, because I took us on a total rabbit trail, I'll ask you another follow-up question. But if you do, I want you to go to that one. I had asked the question of what would you ask? What are the 3 questions you would ask a founder or CEO or marketing team to figure out, do we have a brand or do we have a business?
That's right. So yeah, the first one would be, what's the emotional why of this brand? And I think most brands can't answer that, or their answer is incorrect, unfortunately. I think that a lot of those brand exercises, I look at it, I'm like, that ain't it. And that's not going to animate people. You've got to, it's right, you got to go for the heart. And I think a lot of times you end up with some marketing committee exercise that it's like, they didn't get it. It's there, they didn't get it. You got to dive down to a very deep, dark lake and pull out some exotic fish that you've never seen before. I think that's what the brand work. And secondly, I would ask them, who do you become when you use this brand, whether it's an apparel brand or a beauty brand or it's a thing or, whatever it is, who do you become? And that's another one that I think they can't precisely answer. And so that's always my advice in trying to understand, do you have a brand, and do you have loyal customers, or could somebody else pick them off based on a product feature, or just based on more aggression in the marketplace, which of course happens a lot.
Yeah.
And what defensive moat do you have around this? What's unique to you? If I saw one of your ads and covered up the name of the brand, would I know it was you? What do you have a brand? Is this defensible? Do you mean something to people? Are you a part of their identity? And to do that work is some of the most fun, like super, super fun work, especially for an apparel company, because you get into brand codes. And that was a lot of the deep diving I was doing last summer with Goop. Was we did this whole really awesome brand coding exercise for G Label, which we were transferring to Gwen, rebuilding the brand in some ways, or just refining it. And we based that exercise off of something that we had heard about was done at Tory Burch. Because Tory, if you follow that brand or the industry news around that, it's a very big company at this point, obviously, a big global company, but they felt like they really lost their way, because you get that big, it's like, okay, where are we? Where's the soul, And they wanted to elevate it. That was sort of the brand goal. You want to elevate this. And so they did this. It took a couple of years, but they did this whole war room exercise with Tory of like, let's go back to your child. What are where's this coming from? Let's go to your childhood and nostalgia and mainline Philly and your grandmother and clashing colors and you love Prada, and if we're going to come in, and that resulted in all these brand codes that then were reapplied to the design process. So if we bring a cardigan to market, we're going to have a clashing color around the cuff, right? But like for another project, had talked to all the old French guys who have built, all the cranky old guys who are so diehard brand, and you've got to build something slowly, starting with some tiny little store in Paris that nobody's ever heard of. And you grow it from heart and passion. And, those guys are obsessed with brand coding. And then how do you roll it out across all the touch points of a business so that it comes out the pores of everything that you do? Because that's what happened typically when brands scale, they lose that kind of moral authority. And that's often the point where it's like, they get 100 million, 150, 200. You're redoing that brand exercise because you've lost it. And all these new people you've hired, the new generations of the team, don't have that same instinctual, could know it without knowing it. That's what the 1.0 team, they just know it, right? But then you've got to teach it at a certain point. And so that's often when these exercises get done. It's like, wait, let's go back and figure out essentially what is the soul of this company. And then how do we codify that into brand codes? Like the example I was about to give was Kiehl's. Someone told me this example. His job had been to scale Kiehl's after it got acquired by whichever one it got acquired, L'Oreal or whatever. And it was so fascinating because if you've been in a Kiehl's store, they have one in
they in the airport.
In the airport. Okay.
Or at least they did. Yeah.
Does it have a skeleton and a lab coat?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Because what does that convey? It conveys clinicals, science. You know what I mean? It's very deliberate. Yes. They also had one of the codes, this was a while ago, but one of them was like a brick wall, like a Brooklyn style exposed brick wall. One of them was a crystal chandelier, like it had come out of Paris. You know what I mean? A little European. And then the skeleton and the lab coat. And then on that brick wall have to be like pictures, this is so you. This to pull the community in. So if that store is on a street that is mostly a singles neighborhood, then those Polaroids on the wall will be of people walking their dogs, right? Now, if it's in a
Wow.
neighborhood of young families, it will be people with strollers. You know what I mean? But they do think that was one of the brand codes, is to bring community into the store with that picture wall, right? And to celebrate and personify the community. So brand coding, I've come to believe, I didn't always think this, that it is, if you want to have any longevity to your brand, if you really care about what you're doing, that you have got to articulate the underpinnings of your brand and your connection to your customers and your community, because brand in a lot of ways is community. It's a shared set of values. Communities can be geographical, they could be virtual, but values driven. What is your, got to build community around that brand. I believe that. And with retail, your job is made a lot easier. Veronica Beard does a very good job of this too. That's a whole other story. But I mean, I think the brands that prioritize community are the brands that are going to make it. And a lot of these brands.
Okay, I'm a diehard Veronica Beard. I do a lot of public speaking, and my entire speaking wardrobe is just Veronica Beard blazers. So selfishly, I just want to know, can you tell us the story of, I don't know from like a brand perspective what they did so well to get someone like me to be like, I'm a Veronica Beard blazer girl.
Well,
it worked on me subconsciously because I can't even tell you what it was.
Who do you become when you wear Veronica Beard? How would you answer that?
I feel polished and powerful while still feeling a little funky and feminine. And that's how I love to feel on stage specifically. It's like, that is the culmination of like, I've got authority, but I'm not like a like corporate beige talking head.
Yeah. And do you see yourself as a multitasking woman? You're running this empire. You also have young kids. You must see yourself that way.
Yeah,
you must. We all do. We all do. And what? Okay, so I'll tell you. This is a great. So, first of all, just think about their ads. Like, they will have a carousel from a street style photo shoot of a woman who actually would probably look a lot like you, pushing a stroller in heels on the cobblestone in Tribeca. Then at her desk, with her feet on the same heel, and she's got her Dickie blazer on through every montage of her day, right? And they portray that very deliberately. But there are other things that they do to drive community. So part of it is just they know who the woman is. They know that woman cold. It is a very well-run company. So they know that woman cold, and they are consistent about how they portray her in their marketing, right? So who you become is very clear. It's exactly what you described, plus the multitasking Wonder Woman stuff, right? That's so cool. She's doing all this and like coolest woman in the world, right? But I was sitting on a plane. I grew up in St. Louis, and I was flying.
So did I.
What?
I love that we just caught that, because I feel like if you're from a big city, you don't understand the moment that we just had. I never talk to people on this podcast that are from St. Louis. Okay, we have more to talk about. Neck injuries, St. Louis.
Where did you go to high school? Do you stock emos in your freezer? Do you give
the answer is 100% yes. One of my best friends for Christmas this year sent me an emos ornament for my Christmas tree, and I felt so loved. Okay, anyway.
I knew you were Midwestern. I was going to ask you if you were from the Midwest. I didn't guess. I didn't guess St. Louis, but I knew you were Midwestern. So we'll talk about that later.
I love it. So you're sitting on a plane.
Yeah, so I was flying from St. Louis to Denver, where and I sat next to this woman who had just been on the cover of the St. Louis Business Journal, and she was like a very successful real estate attorney. And I talked to her, and she was like, I had her captive, because so many brands cannot get to the Midwestern woman. And this was affluent, total target demo. But most of the brands, when they get big, just get big. You look at a $50 million brand, they're in Seattle, they're in San Francisco, LA, Chicago, New York, Boston, Miami, Dallas, Houston. When you look at that same brand, when they're $200 million, they're in Seattle, San Francisco, LA. So they're in all the exact same cities. They haven't penetrated them.
Yeah.
They got bigger by getting more market share in those same geos. So this woman, she mentioned on the fly, she was flying out to this real estate conference that whether you're an architect or a realtor, or she was a real estate attorney, right? And she was very proud. She said, the proudest moment, she's like, I had to build my practice from scratch, because the kind of town St. Louis is. She was like, all the other partners at my firm are men, and they were bequeathed their practices. Nobody bequeathed me anything. I built mine from scratch. And she said, the proudest day of my career is when I bequeathed my practice to a woman. It actually gives me goosebumps. I was very touched. I was very moved by what she was saying.
Yeah.
And then she was talking about this conference. She just sat on So the whole conference would be running around in Veronica Beard Dickie jackets. Because I was like, you know, I work a lot with apparel. What brands do you wear? And I was like, really? I was like, the whole conference is going to be running around in Dickie jackets. And she's like, yeah. And I was like, now how did that come about? You know, she's like, I've probably got 5 Veronica Beard suits hanging in my closet in different colors, same different colors. I was like, how did this, and so I had my captive specimen, a Midwestern affluent woman shopping loyally to a brand that none of my brands can get to. So her path, she discovered it at Saks. The whole tragedy of all this wholesale stuff going bankrupt is that it really is one of the key ways that a regional customer discovers a brand. So it's a very typical funnel for a regional woman to discover a brand in Saks, right? So she discovers Veronica Beard in Saks, but she was like, she buys a lot of things, wasn't diehard. Somebody reached out to her from Veronica Beard and said, hey, just if you ever want to run an event for what you're doing, we would love to offer you our store. You know, we could donate the proceeds to charity. And if you ever want to hold an event. And she said, now think about that. Think about that, Liz. That's community. That is community. Somebody at Veronica Beard reached out to her, right? There's somebody's job at Veronica Beard is to reach out to people in metro areas and say, hey, we'd love to host events. If you ever have a charity thing that you're doing or anything professionally, do it in our store, right? Think of the power of that alone, right?
That is it's so basic. And yet I literally just got chill bumps of going, okay, because there's a couple things if we're going to dissect this. Okay. First of all, they hired someone whose job is kind of connects to the Venice Beach story, right? Of like the super cool woman who is an ex-pro speaker who does not have 1 million followers on Instagram, who isn't getting DMs every day talking about, will you post about us? We'll pay you this much. So it's like, it takes extra work to go after the cool but unknown person that aligns with your brand. So it's like somebody on their team's job. And I don't even know, how do you do that? Like, she's probably talking to people in real life. I don't know if she's hanging out on.
I'll tell you.
Oh, okay. So tell us, how do you find the people that are your people, but that are unknown on the internet that other people aren't clamoring to go after? Because that's part of the brilliance is like, it's like all the brands are barking up the tree of the same like 5% of people. And you've got 95% of people. I think a great misnomer about building community and connection from a brand perspective is we have just absolutely over-indexed on the online influence world and going, there are people of enormous influence in their communities that you're never going to find on Instagram because they don't have 1 million followers.
That's right.
So how'd they find her?
So this is what happened. So she keeps that in mind. Then she does a nationwide firm. And so she goes to have an event in New York City for all the female partners, right? Because she's kind of the female lead mentor, you know, of the firm. And she remembers that. And she's like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to call Veronica Beard, see if they'll host us over there and we'll donate to a charity, whatever. So it was from like 7 p.m. to whatever, you know. So you're going to die. So there may be 30 women in I'm so good with this, and he's adorable. By the way, what a cute.
He's very cute. Hey, I need you to be really quiet. You can be in the background. I need you to be super quiet, okay? Okay, love you. Okay, go ahead.
See, you Veronica Beard woman in action as we speak. So,
this episode is sponsored by Veronica Beard.
Be a sponsor for you. So, so at the store, the blonde Veronica, you know how there are 2 Veronicas. The blonde one comes to the event. I was blown away when she told me this. Nobody does this. Veronica goes to the event, the blonde one, and gives them her why speech. Most founders don't even have a why speech because they actually don't know the why of the brand. So that's a big outcropping of when I go in and do this work. We're doing with Frank and Eileen right now as we speak. I'm going to LA next week to finish this with her, with Audrey, who's the founder and a dear friend. And you know, that why speech is very important. And then because you want, and what's important behind it is knowing what the why is, right? And getting that right. So Veronica bombs in, she gives her why speeches, which is close your armor, which so many apparel companies, it's not even like a unique why speech. What's unique is that she prioritized going into that store with 30 women and talking to them about this. So I told the attorney, I was like, why was that worth her time, do you think? Are you surprised that she did that? Did you even know she was going to do that? And she was like, no, she just came. She showed up. And I was like, do you think that was worth her time? And she was like, all 30 of us how much money we spent in that store that night is one thing. What we spent since then is like, we're the most diehard. And I have she put a gift card in because she's on the board of this real estate conference. She put a gift card. She modeled it because she was emceeing the whole thing in her Dickie jacket. I mean, she pollinated a 15,000 person female association of professionals with this brand, not to mention her own law firm and everyone she's ever talked to since. So And then I got very curious, and I work in this industry, so I found my way to somebody who I could pick their brain on this strategy, because
Yeah.
I've never seen a brand do this before, and that they prioritize this blew me away. And I was like, "What is this?" And she said, "Oh yeah, we call it groundswell marketing." And I've used this with so many clients. That's like a term that I use now, groundswell marketing, right? And she said, "You will love this, Liz. We can't measure it. We can't prove to you that it works, but we all agree. The whole executive team and the founders agree that this works." And there is a dedication on staff and on both Veronica's time to pick, they've got, I don't know how many stores they have, maybe 30 stores or something. It helps to have stores, but even if you have one, you've got HQ. Even if you have a partner that is a store, even if you've got a library, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many ways to do community. But I just respect that brand so much. It's a very good company.
It is good. And it takes faith.
Yes.
It really does. It takes a lot of faith from the executives, from the founders, frankly, from the people whose like jobs are on the line with revenue growth, right? To invest in this thing that may not have the clear metrics that some of the other kind of growth strategies do. It really does take a lot of faith and some risk. And I don't know if you feel this way, but the investment, even in this story, I feel like one of the emerging themes of this episode is like, don't despise small beginnings. Like, go to Venice Beach or go to the event with 30 women in a store. Like, I think oftentimes when we think about growth hacking, it's like everything gets so big. It gets big and we need big dollars and we need a big strategy and we need a big company to come in and help us. And there's just a simplicity to this of going, hire one person who trolls the world for just finding out who those women are.
Yep.
The second part of this story that I think is so brilliant, which again, it's like, I'm not going to be the first person that said this. And like, it's like, this is kind of marketing 101, but we forget, is like they led with a contribution. They led with an offer and not an ask.
Yep.
And so I think if I were like, one of the takeaways that I would have is going in and asking brands to get creative, going like, what are your assets? What are the assets that you have that if you were generous, you could benefit others with these assets? If you have a store, that's kind of an easy one. It's like you literally have an event space. You have a footprint that you own. That is a actual asset that put in the hands of your customers could create. That's an enormous gift to give somebody, to go, here's a beautifully curated space. It's going to cost you nothing. You didn't have to come ask us. We literally found you and offered this to you without anything, any expectation or like transaction up front. Then we contributed again by sending our founder to your little 30-person event. I think something that brands get wrong, and founders and executives, the further along they get, is I think that there is this sense of like, well, if you get too close, you don't look cool enough or successful enough. Like, you have to have your layers of people, because what we're going for is aspiration. And if I get too close to the people, then I'm not going to be aspirational anymore because I'm too available. And I just feel like that's a very old way of thinking, that it's like, I don't think that people want aspirational nearly as much as they want belonging. Yeah. Right now, I feel like belonging is the currency. And I even feel like that word kind of got like co-opted in the last several years, and it became this, whole thing about like belonging and inclusivity. And there's a whole nother conversation that we could have about that. But it bums me out, because I think at the end of the day, a brand is creating belonging. It is like being willing to put your flag in the sand. And even when we were talking about Veronica Beard, there's this sense of like, they're so crystal clear on who their woman is. Part of belonging is actually also knowing who's not for you and who you're not for, and being really ruthless about that, and being like, it's okay that not everybody, in fact, it's good. Yep. Like, anytime I meet a founder or creator of any kind, I'm like, tell me who your product's for. And they're like, I mean, really anyone between the ages of 25 and 55 is going to love this product, and you're just like, oh no one's going to buy that product. I think there's a ruthlessness in creating brand belonging to actually also be exclusive and to go, but we're for her, which means we're not for these 100 other archetypes. And we're not going to apologize for that. We are actually going to like really lean into that and be crystal clear. But then to take it from the marketing and visuals into actual reality of finding that woman and then leading with contribution, I just think is such That's such a powerful story.
Very. Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. And I just to go back to your point about the simplicity, you know, I think it's always a good exercise if you're stuck in your marketing. Like, think about what if you were about to go get your first 100 customers? You know, I don't care how big of a
Yeah.
business you are. You know what I mean? What if you had to go do it by hand, one by one? You got to go get them one by one, bare knuckled marketing. You know, how would you go get them? You know, that is, and then there's some amplification of that thinking that would apply to any stage of company. You know what I mean? But and I also agree with you. There are a couple different ways to build brands. Sometimes you want to be aloof, and that's fine. But for the brands that I really get attracted to are in it with their customers. I really that maybe it just makes it confirms things that I believe about life. You know what I mean? I like good guy brands that are there as the Steve Jobs thing of rationing up the species, that really feel like they have a role to play. I think it's part of the nobility of the work, that there's a why of an occupation as well. You know, I believe in that. And I think that what all of us get to do, it's amazing. It's really an amazing seat to get to sit in, is to influence culture and to build brands that sort of help people point their arrow at something. You know, that it's something I like. One of my favorite poets, Seamus Heaney, is an Irish poet, and he has this great phrase about poetry, that he got obsessed with poetry because even the first poem he wrote, the syntax and juxtaposition of the words, you know, that poetry lands on the side of life, which I think is a beautiful, whatever I do, you know, may it land on the side of life. And I think that there's a way to build brands where you are on the side of life. You know what I mean? Because you understand people and you make them feel seen and you make them feel part of something that is bigger and that is noble and on the side of life and on all the right sides of humanity. And I think you help, it's sort of food coloring in the water. You know what I mean? In terms of you know, he had another thing in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech is one of the coolest things I've ever read. And he talks about why he loves Yeats as sort of the quintessential poet, because he understood that the job of the poet is to protect the sensitive sides of our nature and to remind to assure us that that's the right side of being human, is the sensitivity, instead of all the evidence of wrongness around us. In any era now is a very complicated era with a lot of darkness, but a lot of light too. And I think that's the job of brands in some way. And to me, like, Steve Jobs was the quintessential brand builder because he saw his job as rationing up the species, and he made us all more creative and have fantasies about being creative and, you know, personifying ourselves as being creative. And that's what a brand can do, you know? And so I think part of community is really understanding your customer and what excites them about what brings them to the best side of themselves. You know what I mean? In community, when you do it right, you know, that's why you're animating your customer, because you have presented yourself in a way that they can step into it, you know, and become it, you know?
Yep.
So,
And contribute. Do you have any examples of that, of like creative ways that brands have created belonging by actually inviting their customers or their community members into being contributors beyond just like their dollars and purchases?
well, I think Weight Watchers is a brand that I have been working really closely with for the last 6 months to do repositioning. And I love Weight Watchers. I hit my goal weight, by the way. I lost 6 pounds. It works. It actually really, really works. But they, you know, that market has changed a lot. They now prescribe GLP-1s. It's a very different market, you know? And so, you know, it's an interesting time in weight because it's sort of this post-inclusivity moment. Like, the way that you can speak about weight is very different than how you could have spoken about it 10 years.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, it's such a great lady of a brand, and it's such a good guy brand because it really is about believing in people. Sometimes more than they believe in themselves or more than their family believes, you know? And as part of this, I interviewed many members, and it was amazing. I would have just tears streaming down my face, and people, I could see their face drop when I got on the call of like, oh, great, I got to talk to this lady. And like, you know, I look like, I don't know what I wouldn't want to talk to me either, but they definitely don't want to talk to me. But
I respectfully disagree, but continue on.
Well, I think we looked worlds apart, you know, but the reality is that I've had body dysmorphia my entire life, as many women. Certainly, I don't know how old you are. I'm in my 50s, and like that's just kind of a birthright, unfortunately, of a whole probably 3 or 4 generations of women.
Yeah.
And so it was amazing how quickly we could get to friendship, even though we had nothing in common, and be laughing about, like, I would get so pissed because I would my go-to airport thing is an RX bar. I freaking love this. But then I'd look it up on the app and it was like 12 points. And I was like, I have to find something else to eat there. And like, we would just die laughing about all the moments on Weight Watchers that are universal shared moments. Doesn't matter who you are, there's universal. Every weight is a very important pillar of most people's lives, and it's a very emotional pillar. And we talked a lot. I talked a lot about those women and men, about self-esteem and self-image psychology and the narrative that we have in our own heads around weight. And, it's very universal stuff and it's deep. And Weight Watchers, the greatest thing, though, the workshops, which seem archaic, they're not. Because that is a moment of true community where they are giving. And part of their experience is the giving of encouraging other people. You weigh in and you gain.
Okay, will you tell us, will you just set the context? What is a Weight Watchers workshop? If you've never been or don't know what that means, what do they do? What are the just...
So Weight Watchers was founded in the 60s by this incredible gal, incredible entrepreneur, kind of in her living room type thing, church basements, whatever. And then it became this kind of franchise model of, okay, you want to start a Weight Watchers chapter. It was built around, and actually this is very, very proven. This is a fact that if you participate in those workshops or you lose weight with other people, you're much more likely to hit your goal weight, much more. Talking about statistical significance. That is true. And so that was a key lever of their success factor was these workshops. And so you would join the workshops. There were weekly weigh-ins, which seems kind of draconian for us, but also proven to impact, results. And so much of it was the camaraderie of that coach who was leading that workshop, but how it made people feel, to be in there, having gotten to the other side of it and pulling other people across the chasm. You can do this. It's worth it, Yes. And that's a beautiful thing because talk about landing on the side of life, being able to help other people on a struggle that it's probably one of the toughest things in the world is to lose weight. And GLP-1s make it easier, but it's not a silver bullet. You still, you hit plateau points the same as you do with anything else. And it takes work, So
which I think that is touching on I think we're in this moment in culture where it's like everybody's burned out, everybody's tired, everything's so loud, everything's overwhelmed. That I think there's this general sense of like so you don't want to do anything that would ask something of somebody else because we're all feel like too much is being asked of us. But I think that this is a really powerful example of the contribution principle at play, being that it is such a fundamental part of being a healthy, fulfilled human to go, I matter. And I helped somebody, and my presence, my encouragement, my shared experience, my vulnerability in me showing up, somebody else got better, healthier, broke through something. If as a brand, you are the pathway that someone creates a sense of meaning and purpose in their life, I think bar none, that's the most powerful thing that a brand could do. And it is impossible to do if you haven't built the community environment in which that happens. Like the brand is responsible for building that structure and giving people that pathway, but that's powerful. I think that is actually even more powerful than what Weight Watchers did for me was XYZ. But what Weight Watchers did for me was to create a pathway for me to do this for others. And that is worth a lot.
That's right. And you see it in their numbers, even with everything that they've been through, it's still a multi-$100 million company with the biggest name recognition in the category worldwide and a lot of loyalty. They've helped over 60 million people lose weight. And in what you're saying, it is the community piece of that brand is the lever,
Do they have any other I'm not very familiar with the brand. So within that context, I'm even it's kind of giving me like AA vibes, right? Which it's like, I think AA is one of the most powerful examples of this principle in action of take your pain and actually we're going to give you a place to really sit in the discomfort of your own pain. And then at some point we're going to ask you to actually enter into other people's and be a lighthouse. And that journey of transformation is so powerful. And we know that it's impacted so many people and saved lives and changed lives. Are there any, on a practical level that you know of, being so close to the brand, Like, are there any ways, traditions, names, like, do people get, like, when someone becomes that person in the community, does the brand have a way of recognizing them for being that type of contributor?
It's such a good question. If they don't, they should. But because we were debating things like that with now, a lot of that happens through the app, and
Okay. Yeah.
there are still locations, but most people are just using it through the app, but there are virtual workshops, especially with
Okay.
GLP-1s, because GLP-1s, you hit so many problems, most people trying those, and the doctor doesn't know. Like, the only people who know are your peers going through the exact same thing. What
Yeah.
did you do when this happened, right?
Totally.
So it still is an important part, although it's an optional part of the brand at this point. But yeah, because we talked about what's the badging and what happens in the app, when you participate in the brand in certain ways. So I think that those are pieces I wasn't really involved in, but I know
Okay.
that's always a thread of it's a work stream, and but yeah, that is ironclad when you have that.
Yeah. And you did just touch on something that is so powerful. I think a brand's recognition that sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do is not brand to consumer messaging, resources, support, but it's actually creating the environment for peer-to-peer support. What's your take on, I'm starting to feel encouraged by the return to in-person. Like, I think for a while in person really, well, I mean, we obviously have the COVID like whole wrench that threw in it. But I think that there was already this like that our ROI, it's too expensive, it's too hard, it's too small. We could do it all virtually. And so I feel like there was kind of a dismissing of these like old school, not modern ways that I'm starting to sense. It's like we're coming back. We're coming back to realizing the incredible power of kind of investing in those more old school analog in sometimes often even in person. Do you agree with that? Or is that just me putting my wishful thinking lens?
No, I do agree with you. I'm obsessed with that. I've recommended that to a lot of brands, is like, and especially ones with a retail footprint. Like, but even if you don't, you could go be at the marathon with a 10 or the funny run or the turkey trot or, whatever. And, just in general, you're hitting on a real passion point of mine right now, which is just, like this thing rewilding, like with this, in this complicated world. I'm so obsessed with Carl Jung philosophies. And when he, hit his midlife, he built this stone tower on a lake, and he built it with his own hands. He built it. These great pictures of him with these giant stones. But he needed to do something with his hands as a part of finding his inner wisdom and orienting, living his real life, and I think that community is a form of that. It's one of the things that human beings have been doing since the dawn of history. And the more we get away from things, like his whole thing was, as the world gets so fast and high tech, if we don't feed the archaic parts and needs of our psyche, the human race will get suicidal. And he was writing on the eve of the nuclear era, and he was very upset about it, but on the eve of the AI era, I think he would have the exact same fears.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so how do you feed the archaic parts of our psyches? It's doing stuff outside. It's music. It's, doing things together. It's doing things that human beings have been doing for thousands of years. That's the archaic part of our psyches. It gets so left behind from our life. We are so busy. We are so busy, all of us, and in all of our getting, all of our doing, which I don't, we're Americans, that's how we roll. I don't have a problem with that. But there's got to be some, compensation. There has to be some feeding of our psychic needs, and community is a form of that.
And I think knowing where you sit, I may be like bifurcating this to the point that it actually is unhelpful. But I feel like as an entrepreneur founder, I'm like, there's kind of two pathways forward at this point. You either get on the AI train and you're like, we are going to do this better, faster, stronger, more interesting, at scale than anybody else. Or I would encourage you, if you're not going to play the game to own it and to lead it, I think the best opportunity in our marketplace is to completely reorient your thinking towards what are the things that will never be replaced by AI, and then go hog wild in the opposite direction of just like, we are going to own analog, community, connection, these, experiences that truly just cannot be replaced by this. But I think you kind of have to pick your camp and go either way.
Yeah. I believe in that bifurcation. I agree. are you going to zig or are you going to zag here? And the zag is to think about things that cannot be touched by technology. So,
Whew. Okay, I have 1,000 other questions I could ask you in actually totally different categories, but I am just so grateful for your time. I loved this conversation. Thank you for just all of your wisdom and generosity of wisdom in your lived experience and how you've seen these concepts play out in the real world, and for building the case for belonging and community and connection and brand. Just so appreciate you.
no, thank you, Liz. I so appreciate you. We are peas in a pod, and I love all the work that you're doing. It's awesome, and it is, the work you're doing is on the side of life. So I think it's awesome, and I'm really, it's been amazing to have this, to get to talk to you about all this stuff. So thanks for having me. It was super fun.
Thanks. Well, until next time when I rope you into another conversation, stay plucky.